The noble experiment. The prohibition of the production, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages in 1917, coinciding with America's entry into World War I in Europe, was introduced. Starting from 1826, alcohol restriction had been tested multiple times in America. However, two concerns served as catalysts for the 1917 initiative. Opposing groups of alcoholic beverages argued that the production of these drinks consumed essential grain resources needed for bread production during the war, and social reformers believed that alcohol restrictions served as a tool to combat political organizations that supported them. Illegal smugglers and producers. When the alcohol ban became law, support for the 18th Constitutional Amendment diminished. Many who had accepted restrictions on alcohol consumption during the war did not see a reason for the initiation of nationwide abstinence in 1920. It seemed that alcohol prohibition was doomed from the beginning. Organized criminals in the United States, who previously engaged in gambling, drug trafficking, extortion, and prostitution, realized that widespread dissatisfaction with alcohol prohibition presented them with an opportunity to generate immense profits. Infamous criminals in border cities and coastal areas became involved in smuggling alcohol and illegally importing various alcoholic beverages such as whiskey and rum from Canada, Europe, and the Caribbean. Mafia organizations played a role in the transfer of illegal drinks in cities like Buffalo, Chicago, Detroit, and New York. During that period, people saw those openly violating the law and satisfying the people's thirst as folk heroes. Mafia organizations in distant cities, such as Cleveland and Kansas City, discovered that selling materials and equipment necessary for illegal brewing was highly profitable. Collaboration. Criminal organizations nationwide viewed collaboration in the smuggling of alcoholic beverages as lucrative. The Torrio Capone gang in Chicago profited greatly from its old connections with New York gangsters and formed new alliances with organizations in Detroit, St. Louis, and Philadelphia. The Pittsburgh mob established relationships with Chicago and East Coast groups that had better access to imported alcohol. In New York, Arnold Rothstein created a criminal network consisting of German, Jewish, Irish, and Italian gangsters. Cooperation in New York reached the point where mafia groups established a beverage exchange center alongside the street where they could trade their inventories. This center operated with the support of both the mafia and the police, who received bribes from the mafia. Competition. The dollars gained from alcohol smuggling led to conflicts among several mafia organizations. In New York, the Dutch Schultz gang clashed with the Rothstein group and allied with a group of criminals led by the Cole brothers. In Detroit, significant assassinations occurred during the competition between various mafia groups for power. In Chicago, the Capone-Torrio gang found themselves in a life-and-death rivalry with Irish, Jewish, and Sicilian organizations. With the escalation of violence and innocent bystanders becoming victims, the public's perception of gangsters slowly changed. The war in New York's mafia. At the beginning of Prohibition, the Salvatore D'Aquila organization had control over the New York Mafia. After Giuseppe Morello's conviction for counterfeiting money in 1910, D'Aquila became the leading figure in the American Mafia. In 1920, following Morello's release from federal prison in Atlanta, D'Aquila felt his position was threatened and issued death sentences for Morello and some of his supporters, leading to a conflict between the factions. Joe Masseria. In New York City, Joe Masseria, an immigrant from the Sicilian town of Marsala, led a coalition of Sicilian, Calabrian, and Neapolitan gangsters and became a supporter of anti-D'Aquila activities. Ciro Terranova from East Harlem, Tommy Pinocchio from Manhattan, and Frankie Yale from Brooklyn were among those who supported Masseria. In May 1922, the feud resulted in the death of Vincent, Morello's non-blood brother. Shortly after, on the same day, Silvio Tagliagambe, an associate of Valenti, was severely injured in a violence outbreak that occurred near the Beverage Exchange Center in South Manhattan, where 6 pedestrians were caught in the crossfire. The police arrested Masseria as he was attempting to flee the scene but couldn't charge him with murder. In August 1922, when 2 hitmen trapped Masseria near his apartment in Manhattan, both his gang and his life were almost lost. However, he dodged the bullets, and shortly after, his men caught Valenti when he was leaving an Italian restaurant on East 12th Street. Valenti, who had been shot in the chest, fell to the ground and died. The new boss. It seemed that D'Aquila, who had lost his most dangerous weapon and was facing a formidable enemy, had lost all his influence. In 1926, he fled from his old office in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, to a remote home in the Bronx. With the help of old figures like Morello and newcomers like Charlie Luciano and Vito Genovese, Masseria became the new boss instead of D'Aquila. On October 10, 1928, Masseria's victory was complete with the assassination of D'Aquila at the intersection of Avenue A and 13th Street in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Masseria did not learn from the mistakes of his associates. He interfered in the affairs of other mafia families, both by supporting Al Capone's activities against conservative Chicago mafia families and by appointing Capone as his personal enforcer. He supported the downfall of violent bosses in the Bronx, Cleveland, and Detroit. Masseria entrusted the leadership of the Bronx and Brooklyn criminal families to his allies and made the Brooklyn-based mafia organization, originally from Castellammarese del Golfo in Sicily, his subordinate. The Castellammarese War. Masseria's interventions and his attempts to bring non-Sicilians into the American Mafia displeased the conservative factions of the Mafia, especially those who had immigrated from the town of Castellammarese del Golfo in western Sicily. The United Castellammarese factions in Brooklyn, Buffalo, and Detroit were powerful and had a strong alliance with a mafia leader in Chicago. Masseria's loyalists were at war with the Castellammarese from 1929 to 1931. This clash became known as the Castellammarese War. Chicago and Detroit. In 1929, Joe Masseria was asked to mediate in the dispute between Joe Aiello, a mafia leader, and Al Capone in Chicago. Masseria met with Aiello in Chicago. Gaspar Milazzo, a prominent figure in the Detroit mafia world and a Castellammarese native, also attended the meeting. Masseria had a heated confrontation with Aiello. Upset with Milazzo's unwillingness to make a deal, Masseria supported the downfall of this Detroit boss. Masseria's ally Chester Lamar ambushed Milazzo in May 1930 at a fish market and killed him along with his bodyguard. The conservative faction retaliated by killing Lamar in 1931. Meanwhile, Aiello, seeking a strong ally, allied himself with a group of Jewish and Irish gangsters led by George Moran in Chicago against Capone. Capone eliminated the threat from Moran through the brutal massacre on Valentine's Day in 1929. Later, a group of armed men ambushed Aiello in September 1930 and killed him, solidifying Capone's position as the undisputed leader of the Chicago Mafia. New York. Masseria tried to belittle and undermine Colashiro, the head of the Brooklyn Castellammarese. Masseria supported Joseph Perino to lead Shiro's old family, but secretly, the members supported Salvatore Maranzano as their new leader. When Joe Masseria learned that Gaetano Reina was cooperating with the conservative faction, he ordered Reina's assassination in February 1930. Masseria supported Joe Pinzolo to take over Reina's organization. Times are changing. Maranzano led Castellammarese faction with financial and manpower support from Buffalo, Philadelphia, and other areas, proved capable of seeking revenge. The families in the Bronx and Brooklyn swiftly ousted Masseria's appointed leaders. They were able to change the tide against Joe Masseria in the second half of 1930. In August, gunmen from Maranzano's faction killed Masseria's senior advisor Morello in his office in East Harlem. 3 months later, the Castellammarese War came to an end when Manfredi Mineo and Steve Ferrigno, two allies of Masseria, were killed in an apartment in the Bronx. Mineo had become the head of Salvatore D'Aquila's organization in Brooklyn. With his death, this mafia family joined forces with the Castellammarese faction. In early 1931, Masseria attempted to negotiate for peace. However, Maranzano, confident of his superiority in this battle, continued the war. The Castellammarese leader at that time knew that some of Masseria's top men were ready to abandon him. On April 15th, when Masseria was having lunch with his group leaders, he was shot and killed. Charlie Luciano took over the leadership of Masseria's organization and requested an end to the war. The Mafia Boss. Maranzano proclaimed himself as the Grand Boss and held a ceremony resembling a coronation in Coney Island, Brooklyn, and Chicago. Seeing himself as the Mafia Emperor, he announced his intention to distance himself from the day-to-day operations of a single criminal family and instead rule over all American Mafia families. Maranzano secretly prepared a list of mafiosi who did not align with this new order, which included the name of Luciano. However, Maranzano realized too late that Luciano had a list of his own. On September 10, 1931, the new Grand Boss was killed in his office on Park Avenue with knife blows and gunshots. Between the fall of 1931 and the summer of 1936, Charlie Luciano was the most influential mafia boss in the United States. His real name was Salvatore Lucania, born on November 24, 1897, in the village of Lercara Friddi, Sicily, and immigrated to America with his family in 1907. The family settled in the Lower East Side, where Luciano became friends with Jewish and Italian street gangsters. During the era of Prohibition, he was involved in gambling and bootlegging and became acquainted with the mafia empire of Joe Masseria. Luciano assembled a group of powerful friends around him, but he also had enemies. Near the beginning of the Castellammarese War, the police found Luciano in Staten Island, badly wounded. But he never introduced those who attacked him to the police. The collaboration between Luciano and his mafia allies culminated in the assassination of Masseria in April 1931, allowing Maranzano, Masseria's rival, to become the Grand Boss of the American Mafia. Luciano and Maranzano became each other's top enemies. However, Luciano acted swiftly and in September 1931 ordered the killing of Maranzano in his office on Park Avenue. Rather than attempting to become a grand boss like Maranzano, Luciano only wanted to exert control over the old criminal family of Masseria. In 1936, Luciano's power diminished when his association with a group of criminals organizing prostitution in New York came to light. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for compelling others into prostitution. Luciano's assistance to the U.S. Army during World War II led to his early release from prison in 1946. After the war, he was deported to Italy. In Italy, Luciano organized drug trafficking operations between Europe, and the United States. Eventually, on January 26, 1962, Luciano passed away due to a heart attack. Capone and the IRS. The agents of the Treasury Department's Prohibition Unit had little chance in their long battle against bootleggers like Chicago's Capone. However, the conditions were much better for agents of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, who were able to bring several prominent mafia criminals to trial. Capone himself went to court in October 1931 on charges of tax evasion. He had little time to enjoy his position as the unrivaled boss of the Chicago Mafia. Of course, Capone had lived a life of luxury openly. Besides his home, hangouts, and offices in Illinois, he also had a luxurious residence in Florida. The IRS accused Capone of enjoying his lavish lifestyle with income that he had not reported and paid taxes on. Specifically, Capone was accused of evading payment of taxes from 1924 to 1929. On October 17, 1931, a federal jury found Capone guilty. A week later, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison and a $50,000 fine. He remained free on bail until the appeals process, but eventually went to prison in May 1932, initially to Atlanta Penitentiary before being transferred to Alcatraz Island. Capone's physical and mental health deteriorated during his imprisonment. After being granted parole in late 1939, he went to Palm Island, Florida, to be taken care of by his family, and in January 1947, he died following a heart attack. The investigations into Capone's taxes also uncovered evidence that led to the formation of tax evasion cases against other members of Capone's mafia group. Jake Guzik, T.J. Druggan, and Frank Nitti were among those convicted of tax crimes. Waxy Gordon. With the conclusion of the Capone case, the Internal Revenue Service inspectors turned their attention to the financial affairs of Waxy Gordon, an alcohol bootlegger in the New York, New Jersey area. The IRS estimated that Gordon, during the peak of Prohibition, pocketed over $1 million annually from the alcohol trade. Gordon claimed that his income was only a small fraction of that amount, and therefore he paid almost no taxes. In 1933, Thomas Dewey, then U.S. Attorney, brought Gordon to court for tax evasion. The case was clear-cut, and the jury took less than an hour to convict Gordon. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Dutch Schultz. Dutch Schultz, who was born on August 6, 1902, into a German Jewish family on the Lower East Side, had previously been imprisoned in 1920 for theft. He later became acquainted with Jack Diamond, Charlie Luciano, and Arnold Rothstein, a legendary mafia financier. Dutch had control over parts of the Bronx and Harlem and was a partner in a liquor store with Joey No. He became involved in other criminal activities in an aggressive manner and joined forces with Diamond. Diamond, after a close call in a 1929 ambush that almost cost him his life, fled the city. When the ban on the sale of alcohol ended, Schultz turned to extortion and racketeering. He gained control over illegal gambling operations and partnered with the Chiro Terranova Mafia organization. Thomas Dewey, the special prosecutor, kept a close watch on Schultz. The inspector brought the mafia boss to court twice, but was unable to convict him. Initially, Schultz went on vacation. After nearly 2 years, and Dewey leaving the prosecutor's office, Schultz returned to the city to answer tax evasion charges. At the end of the trial, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. His second trial for tax evasion took place in Malone, a small city in northern New York. Schultz and his associates went to Malone before the trial and indulged in extravagant spending. The mafia boss instantly became a renowned figure. At the end of the trial, a jury composed of local citizens found him innocent. However, Dewey did not forget about him. Dewey returned to the government as a special prosecutor and won another indictment against Schultz, this time involving lesser tax charges. He began investigating other misconduct by Schultz. Schultz did not live long enough to go to court for the third time. As Dewey prepared for the third trial, Schultz sent a message to his mafia friends that his patience had run out and he wanted to assassinate the inspector. The Mafia Commission, fearing the consequences of Dewey's murder, ordered Schultz to be killed. On October 23, 1935, gunmen attacked Schultz and his top 3 associates at the Palace Chop House, Dutch's hangout in Newark, New Jersey. When they left, Schultz and his 3 senior aides were severely wounded. Schultz died the following night at a hospital in Newark. The Mafia's Golden Age. When Charlie Luciano solidified his control over the former Masseria organization in 1932, the position of the old boss disappeared, and a commission of representatives from powerful mafia families was formed to resolve family disputes and coordinate multi-family activities. With the significant reduction in the likelihood of interfamily wars, mafia organizations flourished. They also unprecedentedly collaborated with non-Italian criminal organizations. Jewish gangsters such as Meyer Lansky, Louis Buchalter, Benjamin Siegel, and Mickey Cohen established lucrative partnerships with the American Mafia and created new areas of criminal activity and opportunities. This new order quickly achieved great success. A predominantly Jewish faction in Brooklyn transformed into the operational arm of the Mafia, responsible for professional assassinations. This group became known as Murder, Inc. Prostitution and gambling. Near the end of 1933, the 18th Amendment was repealed. Alcohol smuggling was no longer as profitable as before, and criminal families sought new sources of income. Several individuals associated with Luciano's criminal family decided to organize prostitution in New York City and its surroundings. Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey led a legal assault against the rapidly growing prostitution syndicate. When witnesses testified that Luciano was the driving force behind these operations, he was convicted of compelling others into prostitution and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. However, the imprisonment and extradition of the American Mafia leader did not stop the organization's growth. Frank Costello, Luciano's longtime associate, took over the leadership of the largest criminal family in New York and guided the Mafia toward gambling. Havana and Las Vegas. Meyer Lansky, the leader of the New York-based faction, and Santo Traficante Jr., the boss of Tampa's Mafia, managed to secure a share for themselves in Cuban gambling crimes. Cuba, just about 145 kilometers from the coast of Florida, was accessible to American tourists and professional gamblers, but it was not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. It seemed like the perfect place to establish extensive gambling operations. Meanwhile, Benjamin Siegel went to the West Coast and collaborated with Mickey Cohen in managing gambling activities in Southern California. Then he noticed the capabilities of Las Vegas, Nevada, where gambling was legal. Siegel, with the financial support of his mafia associates, embarked on the construction of a high-end hotel and casino called the Flamingo in Las Vegas. However, both businesses were unsuccessful and failed to generate profits. With the end of World War II, there was increased attention towards putting an end to mafia control over gambling and other activities, and the Cafforva committees were a result of this concern.